Hello again. One of the worries that I know some people have when they travel is what happens if things go wrong. And I've definitely put together a few podcasts which talk about planning, and I've done at least one or two webinars where I've spoken about, or at least part of it has been about, how do you plan for trips and how do you minimize the chance of something going wrong. So I thought it was worth doing a podcast just to talk a little bit more about that, excuse me, and also what you can do when things do go wrong. So there's no particular order to this, but I thought I'd start with flights, because I've definitely been caught out a few times on my flights. It hasn't happened often, and I guess looking at the number of flights that I've taken over the years, it's actually a very unusual event when things do go wrong. But obviously, the kind of things that can happen is that your bag might not arrive when you do. It could be on another flight. I guess worst case, it's lost completely, but I've happily never had that. The other thing that can go wrong is that you miss a flight because you're doing two or more flights on the same journey, and the one of them, first one or whatever it is, gets delayed and you can't make it for the next flight. So I've definitely had that. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that. So I guess the first one is what happens if, or what can you do if your bag gets lost? Well, it really comes down to the planning, and a good idea, if you're anything like me, if you think about it, is to just take a photograph of the bag, because that way you know what it looks like and you can show somebody what it looks like. So that's the very first thing. And to be perfectly honest, although I use my bags a lot, when it comes to describing to somebody what they look like, I'll often go a bit of a blank. And if you've not had a bag go missing on a flight before, usually what they'll do is take you through a little process where you identify the bag type and the size and all of this stuff. So if you've got a photograph of it, that can be very handy. And obviously, if that's on your smartphone. What else? Well, just make sure that obviously it is properly checked in. So you've got the code on it. Maybe put a strap on it or labels, something to make it stand out a bit. Now, the thing not to do is to have your address visible on any baggage tags, because it's fine to have them on the bag somewhere. I normally have my contact details on a card inside the bag in case anybody, if the outside tags are lost, then if anyone does have to get into the bag to find out who it belongs to, they've got some information there. The other thing is to get one of these luggage tags, hopefully that's reasonably secure on the outside, but where you slide a card in with your details. Again, I generally put my phone number and my email address rather than a physical address. That might be inside the bag. It's really just to stop anyone who has access to the bag seeing my address. They know I'm not there, basically. So, and there are people around, I understand, who do take a look at baggage tags on bags to see where people who are traveling are off to. Now, I've never had any issues like that, very happily, but I guess it does happen. So that's the first thing. Just make sure it's pretty easy for you to identify your bag and to share that information with somebody at the airport who is in charge of recovering lost bags. So that's one thing. And also with the bags, I mean, you would tend to find out they're missing once you're at the airport normally, unless you pick up somebody else's bag that looks the same as yours. So again, putting a strap around it, anything that makes it look slightly different. And I've seen some interesting decorations on bags at different airports, but it is worth doing just so that it's, first of all, very easy for you to spot your bag when it comes out on the carousel, but also it reduces the chances of somebody picking it up accidentally. So that's the first thing on flights. What I'll also say about bags, if your bag should get delayed, particularly when you're traveling, you really don't want to be stuck without any clothing or without anything important. So all the things that you will need in the first 24 to 48 hours of arrival, I would recommend that as far as possible, you have them in your carry-on bag. So that might be a change, maybe a t-shirt and some underwear, Putting trousers or shoes or anything like that can start to fill up your carry-on, particularly if you've got a camera in it, which is how I normally travel. So anything you need, though, and that might include medication as well, and that might be anti-malarial pills, anything that you definitely need when you arrive, and may not be easy to get at the airport, because if you're getting in late, often in these smaller airports, you won't find shops at the airports. There'll be nothing open. Probably nothing local. If you're staying in a hotel, they may have something, but it's best to assume that you can't get anything in a hurry when you arrive. So just make sure that you have what you need in your carry-on bag. And where I've been traveling somewhere where I know I need walking boots, I'll wear those on the flight. It takes a bit longer because at some of the X-ray machines, you just have to take the boots right off, but that's, I think, reasonably common anyway. Even with ordinary shoes, often you have to take them off. So I would rather have a minor inconvenience at the airport and just to have to take walking boots off, but know that my walking boots are with me, so that if it does take a few days for my luggage to catch up with me, or it doesn't catch up with me at all, I've got the things I really need to continue on the journey. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is what to do if you miss a flight or your flight's delayed, because this really comes down to negotiation and how accommodating people are going to be. I had an issue in India once. I was with, I think it was Air India, on an internal flight over to Mombasa, where I had an international flight back to Sydney, but we were delayed. I don't know why, but just our flight. I guess the aircraft was late or whatever happened, but it was just our flight was delayed. And unfortunately, it was long enough that by the time we got to Mombasa, we had to sprint through everywhere to get to the check-in for the international flight, which was with a different airline. And at that stage, they would not accept both. In fact, I was traveling with somebody else, but they wouldn't accept both us and our checked baggage, because they'd already closed the checked baggage. So we had the option of either flying home on the flight we were due on and having our bags follow us on a different flight, which, to be honest, I was kind of up for, because the trip was over and I thought it was well packed. I'll take my chances, just get it on another flight. But the person I was with wasn't happy with that. So we ended up passing up our booked flight, but and I think we'd got there at 9 or 10 o'clock. It took somewhere until about 3 a.m, where Air India essentially accepted that it was their fault that we hadn't made our flight, and then popped us on another flight. But it did take a little bit of to and fro at the airport. We had an agent helping us out. The airline did provide somebody to help us out, or there was somebody at the airport. So we got lucky that way. Other times, I haven't had many times when my bag has gone astray. Normally I've had it come back, and usually it's actually been on the return trip, happily. Although it did happen once when I was traveling within Africa from one country to another, and the bag showed up on the following day's flight, because there was only one flight a day. So again, it's a case of really just making it clear to the people at the airport, finding someone at the airport who can help you get onto an alternative flight. So how do you avoid that? Well, honestly, the tip I usually give to people is just try and make sure all of your flights are with one airline as much as possible. And because if something does go wrong and you do miss a connection, well, it's that airline. There isn't the opportunity for an airline to point at a different airline and say it's their fault, so they have to sort it out. So that's my tip. It's not always possible. So if you do have to fly multiple airlines, again, another suggestion, and that you may or may not be able to do this, is to just have a break, have a stopover for a day or two between flights, depending on how far you're traveling. That might be a more pleasant way to spend the journey anyway. And then you've got time for your bag to catch up with you. And if that's the case, or if flight is delayed, it's probably not critical for you making a connection. So that's some tips just on the travel side of it. In terms of paperwork documentation, I generally carry a spare set with me of documents, I'll photocopy them. And here I'm thinking about electronic visas, that sort of thing. You normally get a confirmation email, so I'll print that out, and I'll have one set in my carry-on bag, and sometimes I'll have just a backup in my check bag. That's not always accessible, but it just gives me a backup, particularly if I'm doing a series of trips over a longer period. So back everything up. And another thing you can always do, and I do recommend it for any important documentation, is just to take a photograph on your phone of the passport, the page with the information on, any visas, anything like that, so that if for any reason you do lose paper copies, you do at least have a photograph of the original document. And so far, I'm happy to say I've not had to use that, but it does show that the document existed at some point. So you've got a reference. You've also got the document number or the visa number. So hopefully that gives the people who are managing that enough information to look the visa up electronically. Most stuff is on a database somewhere these days. So hopefully it gives you enough information to recover what you need. So again, recommendations to just photograph on your phone everything that you need for the duration of the trip. So maybe you can create a folder, maybe you can on my phone, and just have your travel docs all in there. And a lot of phones, I know these days, have a kind of wallets for things like tickets and all of that stuff. So again, that's all good. The only downside to that is if you lose power to your phone for any reason, or if the phone is damaged. So there's always a potential problem, but I would back up electronically and do a paper backup, and hopefully one or other of those will survive. Okay, looking at what do you do with this stuff? So again, I'm thinking of your documents and all of those things. I like to carry definitely my passport on me. Sometimes I have one of these little body pouch things that is quite slim, but it sits under your clothes. You just strap it to your body under your clothes. And that means it's not obvious you're wearing it, particularly if you're wearing fairly loose-fitting clothing, which you probably would be in a warm environment if you're going there. And if you're in a colder environment, you'll probably have layers on anyway. So it's not for stuff that you need to get easy access to, but it's just a way of keeping it close to you. And again, things like passports, I'll just put in a sealed bag, sealed like a sandwich bag, so that if I do get sweaty or anything like that, I don't actually get water into the document itself. So again, just another thought, and it's easy enough to get these body bags. They don't have the little body pouch things. They don't have to be particularly expensive. They just attach to you, and depending on what you're doing, that might be all you need. Another tip that I've not used, but I thought it was a good one, if you are in a hotel and you use the hotel safe, to make sure you don't forget anything, just put a shoe in there in the safe with your documents, just one shoe, because when you're either packing up, or it might be the shoe that you'll be wearing, or the shoes you'll be wearing when you travel, it will remind you when you can't find the other one that you need to go get your important documents out of the hotel safe. So look, there are different people have different recommendations about how to store all this stuff. It depends what you're doing, where you are. Another thing I'll tend to do is keep my documents inside my my backpack or my bag, but lock it all up every day before I leave the room. So if I'm in somewhere where they don't have provision to store and look after important documents, then I'll just tend to do that. I've been lucky. I've not had an issue with any of that stuff, but things do go astray from time to time. So these are just some suggestions for you. You might have a better idea. You might have a better suggestion, and that's all good. Okay, looking at the photography side of things, what can you do if something goes wrong, or how do you prevent damaging your camera and your lens? So looking at the lens, first of all, I'm assuming it's DSLR or a mirrorless, something like that. I always buy a UV filter when I buy a lens, and The reason is that if you just screw it into the filter mount on the lens, a UV filter, purists will say it does degrade the quality a small amount, but honestly, I don't think I can tell the difference. And by the time I post-processed my image, you wouldn't know. But the UV filter doesn't actually make any difference to the image. Essentially, it's a clear glass filter. And the reason that I use a UV filter is that if I bump my lens against anything or I drop it, if it just stops the glass, the front element glass in the lens from being scratched, because I would much rather scratch a 20 or 50 euro filter than I would a 2,000 euro lens. And so that's tip number one. So whenever I buy a lens, I always buy a UV filter for it. Occasionally I've had a filter get damaged. I don't often carry spares, so it's something to think about. I always use the lens cap over the filter anyway when I'm not using the lens to minimize the chances of something scratching the filter. So again, it's getting into that sort of habit. Now, the other thing that I do to protect my lens is to always put the lens hood on. And that's in the kind of in-use lens, so it's out in front of the lens. And that's because sometimes I'm walking through forest or bush, other times I might be on a boat where things are moving around a lot. And simply, it's just that if the lens should knock against anything, usually it's the end of the lens that will make contact with whatever it is it's knocked against. And if you've got the lens hood on, it means that it's the lens hood that's hitting whatever that solid object is and not the lens itself. And there's enough flexibility and enough give in these plastic lens hoods to absorb most of the energy from that impact. So that is something I do a lot, and I do recommend it. Now, another thing to think about is how do you minimize dust getting everywhere or water. And I have a spray cover, and it's long enough to fit my long lens. So I generally use a 100 to 400 mil lens with on a DSLR body, and the spray hood, it means that I can put that over the lens. So the way I set it up is I have the lens hood on. I'll pull the spray cover over that lens hood. It's basically a hole at the front end, but it's elasticated, so it'll get a good grip on the lens hood. And then that cover, the body covering part of it, will clip over my body. There's normally you have to take the viewfinder cup off, and usually they'll provide something for you that locks the spray cover on, and that will replace your standard eye cup. And then there's sort of various things you zip up, but you can get your hands inside, so you can. Oops, I think I knocked the mic there. I was waving my hands about. Stop video, so that's what I do. So you can get your hands inside the cover and operate the camera normally. If you've got a lens that twists a zoom, it might be a bit odd using it, so you just need to get used to that. And I've got a more of a trombone kind of zoom, which works reasonably well actually with that sort of cover. So look, you might need to just practice a bit with it, get used to it, but I absolutely recommend it because it keeps water off. To be honest, I've tended to use it much more in very dusty environments. And I did have an issue with one trip when I was in Tanzania, and I didn't have that cover. And I was occasionally switching lenses from a long zoom to a wide angle zoom. And I started to get this very, very fine dust getting in. And I was making the lens change inside a vehicle. I was crouched down. I was absolutely minimizing the chances of getting anything coming in. But there's very fine dust that just suspends in the air. And it will get in. It will get on your sensor. And unfortunately for me, it was also getting on the electronics, on the contact points between the lens and the body, and I was getting a communication error between the body and the lens, which meant I then had to take the lens off again and then clean the contacts and put it back together, and it would last for a little while, and then I'd get the same problem again. So hopefully that won't happen to you, but if it does, it is a nuisance, particularly if it's happening frequently enough that you can't get to a room or somewhere where it's clean, and then just give the camera contacts and body and the lens a really good clean. So It's another thing I recommend. Also, it minimises the chances of water damage to the body or the lens, because if you're anything like me, you've got quite an expensive body, quite an expensive lens, and often the lens will be, in fact, one of my lenses costs more than one of my bodies. So you really want to look after that stuff and minimize the chances of anything getting in and damaging things in the first place. So how many lenses should you take if you've got a choice of lenses? Well, I normally take one telephoto zoom and one wide angle zoom. I do have more, and sometimes I will carry a spare long zoom because I tend to use that more. But the problem is I find that I try to do carry on as much as I can, but normally limited to 7 kilos. And a camera and a body for me pretty much uses up a lot of that. Plus I've got a laptop. It's a small one, but it's still another kilo or so. So then throwing in some paperwork, basic change of clothes, a shirt and some underwear and some socks, it doesn't leave much weight to play with. So some people will go overweight, but I think airlines are getting a bit more savvy now, or some of them are, and they're actually weighing, or it's much more likely that your carry-on will get weighed as well. So you just got to be a bit careful about doing that. I mean, obviously you can get more in your the bag that goes into the baggage. But then you've got that issue of what happens, as we've already spoken about, what happens if your bag gets lost or, delayed, all of that stuff. So you're going to have to make that call for yourself, but that's generally what I travel with. In terms of the camera body, I sometimes take a spare body, but you may not have one. I don't always, because it depends exactly what I'm carrying. I might just want to travel with carry-on, which really limits me in what I can carry. So I generally won't have a backup body. If I'm using hold bags, then I generally will put a spare body in. So that if one body is badly damaged, I do have somewhere else to go. And again, it's the kind of trip where I'm probably not going to do it again, or it's unlikely. So I want to make the most of it. So what do you do if something does go wrong when you're away and your body is damaged or your key lens is damaged? Well, look, the only other fallback I can offer you is your smartphone, because most of us carry a smartphone with us. I've already talked about using it as a way of taking photographs of important documents. And of course, most smartphones, particularly if you've got a newer one, they have very good cameras in them. So something to consider before you go away is to look at these clip-on lenses that are available for a lot of smartphones, because some of them do give you very good results, and they take up very little space. So, you can easily throw the clip-on lens into your carry-on bag, so you've got it there. For things like tripods, you can get these very small tripods. So again, you can actually put together quite a useful little kit for your smartphone to use as a backup, which doesn't cost you very much compared to what you would pay for a mirrorless camera or DSLR equipment, and will fit in quite a small place. So they tend to be quite small and quite light. So it's something to think about if you can't carry or don't have extra lenses or an extra body. Do think about buying a few accessories for your smartphone, just clip-on lenses and maybe a tripod. With the remote release, you can set a delay on a timer for most smartphones. So again, as with most cameras, so you can, rather than using a cable release, just have a 3-second delay and then press the shutter button and let the camera delay, so any shake, any vibration is gone, and you can take your photos that way. Another thing to think about, rather than taking a tripod, is maybe a bean bag, or maybe even one of those travel pillows that you blow up. You can blow it up, not fully hard, but so it's slightly soft. That might work just as a way of mounting the camera or positioning the camera on a vehicle or on a rock or on the ground, and giving you something that's stable and might give you some positioning options. So for most of the standard bits of kit, there are options you can think about, alternatives, which might involve things you would normally carry with you anyway, but might allow you to replace a bit of heavier, bigger kit that you would otherwise use if that's an issue for you. Okay, so look, I think they're the main things. I'm just trying to think of other things that have gone wrong when I've been traveling, but usually they're the more critical things I think I've already covered. If you've got any other thoughts or questions, you can always drop me an email at graham@ge.photography, and that will reach me. And I think you can get that information through the podcast information anyway. But there you go. It was just a thought on there are things to think about. And I think with these trips, what you do in terms of planning and preparation, it really is critical. It can make the difference between a very successful trip and having a complete disaster of a trip with nothing to show for it. So when it comes to planning your trips, your photography trips, whether it's wildlife or something else, do really just think through every step of it and what might go wrong and what you can do in the planning and the packing stage to give you some options if things do go wrong. So I hope you found these ideas useful, and I'll speak to you in the next podcast. So bye for now. Oh, and one thing just before you go, please take a look at the 2026 wildlife calendar. That's available now. It's on the website. There's a link below the description of this podcast episode. So please take a look, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye now.